energy expenditure used by the various tissues and organs would be the same. But when we observe how much a human being various organs uses, the brain, you can see there, uses a lot, and the gut uses a lot less. The one that we expected is something you'd expect out of a chimpanzee. So basically, you can see there that our brains increased in size and our guts shrank. Now, why is that? Okay, so here's a comparison between chimpanzee, humans, and Australopithecus anthroensis. I love that word. And if we take a look here with the chimpanzee on the left, you can see it has quite a wide pelvis, and the number of vertebrae from its rib cage going down to the pelvis, there's not that many. The human being in the middle, and our ancestor Australopithecus. So don't worry, I won't have to say that word much longer. And what we can see here is that if you look at our pelvises, they're far narrower than the other two. And if you think of some carnivorous animals like, say, leopards or wolves, they're quite lean and rangy. They have quite narrow pelvises. So this kind of indicates that basically there is less room in a human being to have a very large hindgut or large intestine. And that's where most plant digestion goes on. Next slide, please. Right. But we eat plants too, don't we? So yes, we do. Humans produce amylase, which is an enzyme which breaks down starch into. Does anybody know what starch is made out of? Yeah, sugar. It's made out of glucose. It's just a glucose polymer. Okay, and some populations, particularly ones who've evolved in recent history to eat a lot of root vegetables, things like that, produce about 5 times as much as others. People like the Inuit Eskimos, they don't really produce that much because they're not exactly eating potatoes and mangoes and things like that. So our large intestine is the site of where most of our plant digestion occurs, but plant material is acted upon by bacteria or gut flora. In fact, a lot of you may not know this, but out of all the cells making you up right now, 9 out of 10 of them aren't you. They don't share your DNA. Bacteria, and they're about 1,000 times smaller than your cells. And a lot of these bacteria, without them, you'd die. So humans lack the gut flora that produce cellulase, which is an enzyme that breaks down cellulose in plants. Chimpanzees have a longer hindgut, and they're called hindgut fermenters. And so essentially, we cannot digest too much plant material. However, there are certain other fibres, like inulin, which is a fructose polymer, found in leeks, onions, things like that. And that is actually acted upon by the bacteria in your gut, and that makes short-chain fatty acids called butyrate. So we can absorb that. So next slide, please. Thanks. I put this slide in here because of human migration out of Africa. So this is the commonly held understanding of where humans came from. And if we look at the migration patterns here, we can see that we basically moved into various environments over time. Now, you tend to see a lot in nutrition and things like superfoods, and like goji berries and things like that, and they make them out to be like some miracle food. But you can see from here that because we all came from have adapted to a wide variety of environments, human beings, a lot of these plants didn't exist. So what food did human beings absolutely need in order to have a big brain, smaller gut, and in order to be healthy and survive? I mean, you weren't exactly eating mangoes if you're from Northern European ancestry, as most of you are here. Your ancestors weren't eating those sort of things. So you have to ask yourselves, what nutrients do we really need? And then, next slide, please. So I'm just going to do a quick comparison between primates in terms of guts. If we were to take a chimpanzee, chimpanzees in the wild typically have about 5% body fat percentage. They are actually quite lean guys. But if you look at them, they've got a nice pot belly. Is it because they like the beer? I don't think so. Basically, their large intestine is where most of their food absorption of plants occurs, and that's acted upon by their gut flora. Remember I said about cellulase? Well, they carry a bacteria in their guts that digests the plant's products. Human beings, for what made us human essentially was the ability to use fire and basically gain more nutrients out of meat and other plant materials. This allowed our guts to shrink and our brains to increase, but like I said earlier on with Kleiber's law, it doesn't really matter what caused our brains to increase and our guts to shrink. It had to follow Kleiber's law. Next one, please. Right, so humans are omnivores, it's pretty obvious really. We are on the omnivorous spectrum of animals. So if I have, say, at the one end of the spectrum, complete herbivores, on the other, carnivores, so let's say cows and cats, we're on the carnivorous end of that spectrum. We're more carnivorous than pigs, but less so than dogs. Right, so I want to move on to what is basically what has changed in our diet and is causing a lot of these chronic problems in our health. And the first one is omega-6 linoleic acid. And this thing is found in, it's a fat. You've all probably heard of omega-3 and omega-6. And it's found in temperate plants. So your things like nuts and all these sort of things, sunflowers, any plant that grows in a temperate environment produces a lot of omega-6. Omega-6 is mainly found in high concentrations in the seeds of plants. So a lot of it's the main component of vegetable oil, sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, linseed oil, which is basically furniture varnish. I can't believe people eat that stuff. Margarine, certain processed foods, and about 6% of olive oil is omega-6. The rest of olive oil is monounsaturated fats, which are perfectly fine for you. It's a 20-carbon polyunsaturated fat. And in a human being, based on what we've evolved to eat, if we look at the fat ratios, if you do a fat biopsy on any of you, depending on what you eat, you'll have slight differences. Just out of interest, the fat in your bodies is similar, say stored in your bum, is similar to that of a pig. In Western diets, this ratio, particularly in America, can be as high as 40 to 1. Now, omega-6 and omega-3 form biochemical messengers called echinocenoids, and these guys behave competitively. Now, omega-6 makes pro-inflammatory compounds and signaling molecules, and omega-3 anti-inflammatory ones. Next slide, please. Now, here's a study called the Leon Diet Heart Study, and it assessed the effect of omega-3 supplementation. So what they did basically was they fed a load of people margarine high in omega-3, but the overall polyunsaturated fatty acid intake was lowered. In particular, omega-6 was reduced relative to controls. This was a very good study, it was controlled very well. And this resulted, and I put the exclamation mark there, 70% reduction in cardiac mortality and a large reduction in all-cause mortality. That is phenomenal in any controlled study in terms of causing benefit. If you can reduce people's heart disease and things like that by such an amount, that really points to something at play. So in 1970 then, a study conducted by Dr. Malhotra compared meat-eating Indians in Udaipur, which is northern India, and they ate a bit of meat, but they also they didn't eat a lot of meat, but they had the highest, at that time, the highest butter fat consumption in the world, and low in polyunsaturated fatty acids, versus vegetarian Indians in Madras, which ate peanut oil and margarine, and which was very high in omega-6. As it says at the bottom there, the Indians in Madras had 15 times the myocardial infarction, that's big-time heart attacks, than the ones in Udaipur. Unfortunately now, because of a lot of these companies, a lot of the Indians in the north now are using vegetable oils and having heart attacks left, right and centre. So next study. So other diseases linked to excessive omega-6 consumption. Actually, there are a lot more, but I just thought I'd keep it simple. Basically, because it creates these pro-inflammatory compounds called echinocenoids, it creates a state of low-level general inflammation in your body. So there's this idea that as we age, we wear out. We don't actually wear out, we flame out. So the more inflammation that's going on in your body, the faster you age, the quicker you die. So, put simply. So, increased risk of prostate and colorectal cancer. It's linked to increased risk of thrombosis, which is blood clots. And it contributes to something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, along with something else called fructose, fruit sugar. Promotes acne. If you look at hunter-gatherer tribes, when they're going through puberty, eating their natural diets, they don't get any acne whatsoever. It seems to be something that happens a lot in our environment. Increased risk of pancreatic cancer, and like I said, trashes your skin. Next one, please. Now, this is a bit controversial, but the correlation is so strong that I thought I'd just put it in, just for food for thought, excuse the pun. And essentially, this is just a diagram. I should make a point here. Correlation does not equate to causation, okay? So no matter how tightly you see a pattern between two variables, there could be confounding variables. So there could be other reasons why there's homicide and what have you. So, but the correlation is very strong here. Can anyone guess what the top one there, these are various countries. Unfortunately, when I ported this over, I couldn't get all the labelling of the countries in. Can anyone imagine what the top country with the highest homicide rate is? Well done, you win a gold star, well done. Yes, it is, it's the United States. If you go to the next slide. So I'm going to speak about confounding variables. Here's the United States. If we look 1961, you can see that the homicide rate was far lower. And if you look, as it goes up and up and up, you can see as consumption goes up, the amount of homicide seems to go up. Of course, there are a lot of confounding variables. Can anyone think of a confounding variable in the USA that would increase homicide? Population. Yeah, well done, gold star. So guns. So let's go a bit closer to home and remove that and confounding variable. Next slide. This is the UK. We don't really have many guns in this country, but I'm sure there's other confounding variables in this. And as you can see, 1961, the murder rate was far lower with omega-6 linoleic acid. This is the good old days when people used to eat lard and butter, things like that, instead of vegetable oils and margarine. And look at the year 2000. It's kind of frightening, really. I'm not just saying that basically if you eat lots of lard, you're going to become some homicidal maniac, but it makes you think. Sorry? Didn't have McDonald's in 1961. No, that isn't. That's a good point. Yes, in fact, a lot of foods cooked in fast food restaurants and what have you, they're cooked with vegetable oils and things like that. A lot of processed food contains vegetable oils, things like that. Next one, please. Right, this is the next little culprit that causes lots of problems in people, and that's fructose. Fructose is a fruit sugar. You've probably all heard of high fructose corn syrup. Right, so I'm going to explain what this little guy does. Fructose, you can see there, is a 5-carbon ring. It's called a pentose monosaccharide. And glucose, which is an important molecule, dietarily unnecessary but metabolically critical. 6-carbon, and sucrose, which is your table sugar, is the two holding hands there. Next slide, please. Thanks. So fructose is a pentose monosaccharide, and it's highly oxidative, found in fruit. Why do you think you've probably all heard of like antioxidants in fruit? Well, the antioxidants in fruit are there to protect the fruit from the fructose and the glucose. Okay, so and it cross-links with proteins in something called the Maillard reaction. And the Maillard reaction, any of you into your cooking and you brown meat, essentially that's carbohydrates cross-linking with the proteins browning the meat. So if you eat too much sugar, essentially you're browning your arteries, your organs, your tissues, things like that. Okay? So now fructose is metabolized rather differently than other monosaccharides in the liver, similar to alcohol, and it causes the formation of something which is quite an acronym, which is quite appropriate in this case, called AGEs, Advanced Glycation End Products. So for instance, if you have skin with collagen, protein, you have loads and loads of, and you eat too much fructose, or sugar for that matter, it links with the in a process called haphazard glycation, where it links with the proteins and cross-links, makes your skin less flexible, damages tissues, very good at smashing your kidneys as well. Ages you really quickly too. Now, it causes leptin resistance in tissues and organs as well. Now, leptin is a hormone that regulates your body's weight. It's a feedback mechanism, but essentially, without leptin, you can't. People without very low leptin tend to be anorexic, things like that. It plays a very strong function in our ability to feel full, things like that. It comes from your fat cells, goes to your brain and says, "Can you stop eating, please?" And it's highly lipogenic. You probably can't see it there. Lipogenic means fat creating. So if you want to get morbidly obese, nice and quick, eat lots of fructose. As I mentioned earlier, it's found in fruit, berries, honey, table sugar, agave nectar, and high fructose corn syrup, certain processed foods such as fruit juice. It's actually sweeter than sucrose and glucose, but it has a low GI because it's metabolized differently. Normally when you eat sugar, your insulin goes up, and insulin, when it goes up, it moves your food into your fat cells. When your insulin is low, you tend to access the fat in your fat cells, and you start burning the fat in your fat cells. But when you're eating a high-carb diet, you tend to you stop accessing the fat in your fat cells, and your body burns off whatever you're eating. I'll go on to the next one. And increases serum triglyceride levels as well. So what your liver has done, because we ate berries seasonally as hunter-gatherers, so we encountered fructose in our environment, and we've evolved a mechanism to deal with it, and that's basically to turn it into fat. That's the way we do it. But when we do this, it's highly inflammatory to the liver and creates an inflammatory process in the liver and a fatty liver. That being said, I should note that there's something called a dose-response relationship. So for example, if you use a nicotine patch on your skin, you get some nicotine out of it. However, if you were to place 1 drop of pure nicotine on your tongue, it would kill you instantly. So the point is that poison is in the dose. So if you eat a couple of berries, it's not going to trash your liver. But if all you ever eat is like Coca-Cola, high fructose corn syrup, fruit juice, those kinds of things, then I'm afraid you're going to come a cropper. And it's a hepatotoxin, as I mentioned earlier, in large enough doses, and it causes gout via elevated uric acid levels. You also see this other one, that eating too much red meat causes gout. That's a pile of crap. It's actually uric acid. Fructose, your body to handle it, I don't want to get too techy and biochemical on you, but fructose is joined with phosphates, and the phosphates turn it into something called fructose 1-phosphate, which basically stops it from oxidating your body too much. It's a bit like throwing sand in a car engine. And what that does is a biochemical process then goes on, which uric acid levels become elevated. And uric acid, by the way, is one of your body's own antioxidants. And it causes insulin resistance, which leads to diabetes. Next one, please. Right, yeah, so increased risk of type 2 diabetes. It's a major causative agent of metabolic syndrome. Again, if you eat too much of it. Linked to pancreatic cancer as well. Works really well with polyunsaturated fats to trash your liver and pancreas. Causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, probably more effective than beer. Much greater risk of being morbidly obese from it. An increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And it has an opposite effect to glucose in the cortical areas of the brain, i.e. eat more. So that's, by the way, why they added to fructose, McDonald's does, to the bread on the buns, and to the dips and everything, so that you go, I like McDonald's. So and it makes it addictive. So and it also feeds certain gut flora, causing bloating and wind, and you get fructose malabsorption, and because it's highly oxidative, whatever it touches, it sticks to. It's very, very sticky in a chemical way. It's just bad, bad, bad in large doses. Now, this little culprit, gluten and wheat germ agglutinin. I should mention something about plants. Plants aren't like animals, can't defend themselves by running away, biting you, butting you, stamping on you, or whatever. So what they do is can anyone tell me how plants defend themselves?
Poison.
poison. Anything else?
Taste bad.
Taste bad, and also armour. You know, they make themselves hard to eat. So, you know, plants generally negotiate with animals with lovely substances like strychnine and things like that. So, you know, and you've got to remember that this is the difference between the two here. Fructose is found in fruit, and plants want animals to eat their fruit and obviously poo out their seeds and spread the seeds. So fructose is designed by evolved by plants, not designed by them, to basically make you like it, make you eat the fruit, make you basically poo it out and spread their things. But also, because they're little buggers, plants, they give you that fructose to hopefully damage you along the process as well. And they're nice, they are. And but the thing is, human beings have been cultivating all these plants, like fruits and all that. I mean, like for instance, the modern day strawberry didn't come about till the 17th century. So a lot of the fruits we eat today, we've bred them to become sweeter and more, carry more antioxidants and all this sort of stuff. But frankly, most of those antioxidants don't really do anything. They just go into your liver and get detoxified. But now with gluten, however, basically, gluten is found in a lot of seeds of plants, particularly cereal crops. Cereal crops are just basically grass that we have bred to be nutritious to us and get food out of it. With the Neolithic Revolution, when we started growing these plants, prior to that, in the Paleolithic period, paleoanthropologists looked at the skeletons of humans living in the Levant area. And they found that these guys, according to some of these paleoanthropologists, said, one of them said, in fact I always remember this, I feel positively malnourished looking at these skeletons. But once we started growing wheat, men dropped 6 inches in height, and so did women, from an average of 6 foot to 5'6". And it's mainly because of these compounds here. Our skeletons became a lot weaker, we became, shall we say, a bit more runty. Right, so it's found in wheat, pasta, cereals, a lot of processed foods. There's too many to list here. If you look at any packet in a box of any food in the supermarket, you'll probably see gluten in it. Even in hamburgers, unbelievably. So, unfortunately found in beer and some spirits. That's a shame. You can get gluten-free beer. I've never seen it though. And essentially, there's these seed defense toxins, and they don't like I said earlier on, they don't like having their babies being eaten. So it's only been a staple part of the human diet for approximately 10,000 years. Most populations have had even less time to evolve to eat it without negative side effects. People who can directly trace their ancestry to places like Iraq and all that, they tend to cope with it better, but it still causes a lot of illness in these people. And when I was mentioning earlier on about dose-response to relationships, unfortunately, this stuff is toxic in nanomolar quantities, which is tiny. And its main modus operandi, in terms of screwing you up, is via a process called molecular mimicry. I'll get into that in a bit more now. Next slide, please. Right, this is a picture of a celiac. Does anyone know what a celiac is? People with celiacs? No?
Allergy to gluten.
Yes, in a big way. And these people, unfortunately, it's very difficult to diagnose because normally you do it by sticking an endoscope down into your small intestine. And what I want to show you here is in the first slide here on the left, these are the villi in your small intestine. And essentially they're like finger-like protrusions. They're there to increase the surface area of food, of the gut to absorb food. And it's a 1 cell thick membrane on the outside, the endothelium. And then you can see there in the next slide, this is someone from a celiac, and you can see that all the protrusions are gone. So that it actually stops you from absorbing food properly. And you don't have to be diagnosed celiac for this stuff to be affecting you. This is the rather worrying thing about it. So yes, if you certain people have a genetic propensity to develop celiac, and it causes a leaky gut. By that I don't mean you keep browning your pants. What I mean by that is essentially that 1 cell thick endothelium breaks up and various molecules enter into your bloodstream, like feces and things like that, yeah, nice. And your body, fortunately, has 70% of its immune system is around your gut lining, and so your body attacks what's ever there with inflammation. And this is probably the most scary one of them all. It is very, very strongly linked to schizophrenia in a subset of people. There's one medical case when I was researching this that I read. It was a lady who suffered it was nutrition and metabolism, where a lady's suffering with schizophrenia for 30 years of her life, decided to set herself on fire because the voices in her head told her to. She used to hallucinate skeletons, things like that. So when they treated her, they found out she had celiac disease. They then put her on a gluten-free diet, a ketogenic diet in fact, and then within about 6 weeks this lady was off her psychiatric meds, and for the first time in her life stopped hallucinating. It's linked to cardiomyopathy. What it does, it causes an autoimmune response. When I mentioned earlier on about leaky gut, so if you can imagine molecules like pieces of Lego, some of these proteins enter your immune system, into your body. Your immune system sees these as foreign invaders, but some of these protein structures are similar to some of the protein structures in your body. So your immune system gets confused and starts attacking parts of your own body. It's also an insulin mimetic. This is a process called molecular mimicry. So essentially it's similar in behavior to certain hormones in your body. And so a slice of white bread, or brown bread even, will raise your blood sugar higher than a Milky Way bar. Can cause brain fog in a lot of people. I used to eat a lot of gluten, things like that. I used to weigh about 2 stone more than I do now. I had a lovely double chin. Essentially, when I went off it, for the first time in my life, basically, I felt like someone had upgraded my memory or something like that. I just started thinking a lot more clearly, and it's mad, basically. So I wonder how many of you eat pasta or whatever and bread. I wonder if you went off it for 6 weeks, how you'd feel. You know, maybe worth a try. Now, also, it causes immune responses, and it invokes an antibody response. Not all the time. In fact, there's 2 immune system responses in the human body. There's 2 levels. There's the adaptive system, which is antibodies and what have you, and then there's the innate system, which basically sees a foreign invader, paints a big red cross on it, and then hits it with inflammation. But in the crossfire, surrounding tissues and whatever get annihilated in the process. It's the first system that kicks into play, and yeah, it's quite a dangerous compound, really. So, and it causes also an immune response on the beta cells of the pancreas, which is type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetics without insulin, no matter how much you feed them, they can't store food. In fact, they become emaciated and die. They become ravenous, in fact. They'll nick food off your plate and stuff like that, and they just die. It's a bit crazy. So that's why they need insulin, to put that food away. Next slide, please.
Can I ask you, has anyone researched into the mechanism that connects the brain problems with the gut problems, where you talk about schizophrenia and brain problems?
Yeah, I can go into that later if I can run through this. Yeah, keep the question there. That's a good question. Now, here's an enzyme called tissue transglutaminase. Tissue transglutaminase is an enzyme in your body that shapes every protein in your body. So proteins in your eyes, your reproductive organs, your skin, your brain, your kidneys, everything. Every protein in your body is shaped and formed using this enzyme. And this wheat germ agglutinin, which is a plant lectin, which is a defense protein, affects the function of that. So you can see the knock-on consequences of wheat germ agglutinin affecting. It can cause all sorts of sequelae, all sorts of different problems within the body. And obviously with stomach acid, it's supposed to be highly acidic. The function of that acid in your stomach is to basically cook your food, chemically as it were, and to kill any pathogens and what have you. But in order for gluten to get into your small intestine and cause trouble, it needs to lower your stomach pH, and it does that by various mechanisms. And protease inhibitors, these are pepsin, trypsin, these are enzymes produced by in your small intestine to digest proteins, break them up, and in your stomach, and it prevents full digestion of these proteins. So when gluten causes a leaky gut, these protein fragments get into your bloodstream, your immune system attacks it, and then, given enough time, you can become a cropper. And a whole host of immune systems can, sorry, I missed the phytates. Yeah, these are little troublemakers too. These basically bond to minerals very, very easily. Magnesium, zinc, calcium, and they can lead to osteoporosis or iron deficiency anemia in sufficient quantities. A whole host of autoimmune diseases, in fact, are linked to this. Multiple sclerosis, alopecia, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, the list goes on. And a study in the US attributed a disease burden, attributable again, to gluten at approximately 12%. This is a very conservative study, by the way, because it's very difficult to, due to modern testing techniques, to actually figure out how many people are actually respond to gluten. This is a very, very large figure. For one foodstuff, just to cause 12% of total disease burden, that's quite a high amount. And as I said, there's much higher probably. Unfortunately, down here has come off the screen, but it's linked to autism. There are probably other mechanisms to play with autism, to be fair. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, lupus, infertility, narcolepsy, even more. One of the mechanisms when it comes to autism is believed that low vitamin D levels in the final trimester of birth seems to play quite a large function in that. There's still a lot of research that needs to go into that, but one of the mechanisms in wheat germ agglutinin, when I did my biochemistry course, we used to study, we used to radioactively label wheat germ agglutinin. Never thought about it at the time, and we used it to go into cells and work out the chemistry of cells. And one of the places it lands up on the nucleus of your cell, where your DNA is on the vitamin D receptor. So vitamin D comes along and it basically tells your cell, switch these genes on, switch these genes off. Well, vitamin D, wheat germ agglutinin blocks that receptor, so your vitamin D levels actually plummet, and which is not good. In fact, I think, can't remember the top of my head, but if your vitamin D levels fall below 33 nanograms per mil, your chances of developing cancer go up something like 2,500%. Yeah, so get some sun. And yeah, nice stuff. Next slide, please. Yeah, soya. Now, there's a lot of misinformation from basically companies about soya. You see soya bread, soya this, soya that. Now, I mentioned earlier on about phytates and phytic acid. Well, seeds contain this, and this stops in absorption of minerals. And soya contains the highest amount of it, of them all, basically. And there's another so, you know, if you really want to develop osteoporosis and various other nutrient deficiencies, keep eating large amounts of soya. Should note, though, that populations like the Japanese and what have you use miso and other foods like that, soy sauce. They ferment soya, so it actually breaks down some of these compounds. The bacteria that act on it break down some of these poisons in soya. But the soya we eat in the West in particular, like soya milk, soya burgers, whatever, that stuff is actually made in a plant, an industrial plant. It's not natural at all, and they don't remove most of these toxins. In fact, two things they use in the making of it is nickel, and nickel has been shown to be carcinogenic. And there's some of it in there. And this other compound here, soy isoflavones. You may have heard in adverts, plant estrogens, things like that. Well, these are endocrinal disruptors. Genistein is one of them. So again, I was mentioning earlier on that plants don't like you eating your babies, their babies rather. So if you're eating these, so I'm anthropomorphizing a bit, from an evolutionary standpoint, the plants are saying to you, right, you're eating my babies, I'm going to stop you having babies, I'm going to mess up your fertility, I'm going to do all these kinds of things to you, I'm going to screw you up, stop it. So it affects hormones in men and women. It disrupts menstrual cycles in women. In fact, it causes precocious puberty in girls. In some parts of America, where they people on food stamps, where they have food that's produced by some, you know, big corporate big food companies and what have you. Unfortunately, they're seeing girls at the age of 3 developing breasts, which is just horrific, really. And in male infants of around 3 months, 3 months old, all male infants develop something called a testosterone surge. And in fact, the testosterone levels in male infants for body weight, weight for weight, are the same as that of an adult male. It only goes on for a little while, but it helps the male infant develop male characteristics. Well, if you may have seen some infant formulas, they contain soy. So bear that in mind. So yeah, increases breast cancer risk in women, delays general development in boys, and brings about precocious puberty in girls. Can cause erectile dysfunction and hypogonadism in men. So if you want a limp dick, you know, eat your soy. But like, actually, I read a paper when I was researching this on a 19-year-old type 1 diabetic vegan, and he was eating something like 4 pounds of soya a day. Yeah, he couldn't get it up, poor little guy. But anyway, they took him off it. A year later, he started playing around again. Good for him. And then I read another paper then about another vegan, incidentally, who was a woman who was eating lots of soy, and she developed persistent sexual arousal syndrome. She was getting very, very horny. She couldn't stop masturbating. But unfortunately, she was also suffering from amenorrhea and other menstrual problems. And it's found in various processed foods, usually in the form of soy lecithin, which is added to a lot of foods, actually, if you look at the labels. So that's a bit worrying, really. So next slide, please. Thanks. So, you know, given what I've told you, probably the next question is, what the hell do we eat? Now, if we look at the one on the right, that's basically the food pyramid that a lot of people are familiar with. You notice that they say stuff like healthy whole grains and things like that. It's almost like one word, healthy whole grains. But I just mentioned to you earlier on that grains are seeds. Seeds don't like being eaten, so they have compounds that screw you up. So, now, who came up with this guy, Walter Willett? I refuse to call him a scientist. I prefer to call him a grant whore, even though he belongs to Harvard. This chap, most of the research that's done by this is funded by big pharmaceutical firms and big agri. And so the sponsor of this is the US Department of Agriculture. How many people think that farmers know what is good for human metabolism? You know, especially corporate, you know, large-scale farming. So really, a more simplified version, and is really this one, the one I would recommend. And it's basically based on something like what's called a Paleolithic diet or a Stone Age diet or a pastoral diet. For instance, if you can trace your ancestry directly from Africa, well, we all can, but if you're, what I'm saying is if you're a black African, 90% of you can't metabolize lactose, but the vast majority of Northern Europeans can. So there's certain genetic differences, but for most Northern Europeans, they can handle dairy. So if we look at the foundational foods, really, the foods you need to be healthy, we've got fats, and we've got animal fats, coconut, olive oil, but not olive oil for cooking, that's important. Olive oil gets oxidized and gets damaged, particularly the polyunsaturated fat component, and basically your body has to deal with that, and that also causes problems further on. But, you know, again, it's the dose-response relationship. If you eat it once in a while, it's not going to kill you or anything like that. And avocado. What's so great about coconut and palm oil is that it's actually a saturated fat. So if you think about butter, if you put butter in the fridge, it's hard, it's full of saturated fat. Coconut oil is basically pretty much all saturated fat. And the reason that is because coconuts are found in hot tropical areas, you know, where the temperature is 30 degrees plus. So it's always in a liquid form. But temperate plants, living in colder environments, they can't have that, otherwise the fat would harden and they can't function. So they use polyunsaturated fats because they have a lower melting point. So things like fruits, berries are fine, but you know, there's this whole idea, eat 5 a day, what have you. But you know, the earlier slide I was showing you where humans lived in various environments and spread about, we didn't all come from environments that had the same plants. So it doesn't make sense in evolutionary terms that there is some plant compound that is some panacea for your ills. A lot of these ideas just come from advertising and promotions. It's the profit motive corrupting basically nutritional information. Non-starchy vegetables. If you're not obese, you're not diabetic, you know, eat starchy vegetables, go for it, you know, eat a potato, just because, but if you're like, say, trying to lose weight or whatever, probably ditch the starch, ditch the sugar. meats, you know, grass-fed ruminants. And this is from an American website by a doctor called, she's called Dr. BG. She's a pharmacologist at Stanford. And in America, the cattle is fed grain. You know, last time I looked in a field, cows were eating grass. Not really good for cows. So, you know, we're quite fortunate in this country that our meat isn't so tainted. Pastured poultry, you'll see in supermarkets corn-fed chickens. Anybody who looks at a chicken in the wild, they're about 90% carnivorous, they eat bugs. Healthy fish, eggs, they're all great. No, then you can eat, then as an option, eat veg, starchy veggies if you want to. Nuts and seeds, but don't go overboard with nuts and seeds, because even nuts contain these compounds out there to basically stop you from absorbing food, causes wind, all that sort of stuff. Instant irritable bowel syndrome, whenever you hear the word syndrome, it's medicalese for we don't quite know what is causing what you've got, basically. So gluten is probably one of the biggest culprits behind that as well. And optionals then are dairy and what have you, but you'll see in some cheeses it says suitable for vegetarians. Well, I'm afraid that contains soy, because rennet, which is part of cheese manufacturing, it comes from the animal. So basically what they do is they use soy lecithin in the cheese. So, you know, watch out for that. And then avoid grains, legumes and excessive sugar consumption. And I don't think there's another slide after that. No? Yeah.
When you said nuts and seeds, what do you mean by seeds then? Because you said that seeds...
I mean, ultimately I was talking about a dose-response relationship. So, you know, if occasionally you eat some, like corn actually, corn is a seed of a kind. Well, sunflower seeds as well, you know, if you're using it for a dish, you know. Look, after all, meat has, look, plants, in terms of texture and flavour, meat can't match plants in terms of the range of, you know, texture and flavours. You know, it'd be boring if all you ate was a lump of, you know, steak every day with nothing on it, you know. So I'm not saying don't eat plants and what have you, but there's this idea that, you know, the more you eat plants and all that, the healthier you become. Well, that's not necessarily the case. By the way, you probably heard of the antioxidant theory of aging. That was disproven in the 90s. The reason this idea of antioxidants is just pushed by Big Pharma because they own the vitamin companies. So really, a high animal fat diet is probably the most suitable one. You need fat for your brain, basically. And if I like took your brain, nothing personal, and sucked out all the water out of it, the vast majority of it is long-chain fatty acid chains made out of saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and a little bit of omega-3, a little bit of omega-6. It's really funny, like people eat things like sardines for omega-3, things like that, and they'll buy it in sunflower oil. So they're getting like a shitload of omega-6 with the omega-3. So it doesn't matter how many sardines they eat, because they behave competitively, you're just getting loads of omega-6 and not enough omega-3. In fact, women have quite a high requirement for omega-6 because, compared to men, not a tremendous amount, only a little bit more, because women go through a very inflammatory process, menstruation and childbirth. So these ecannabinoids play a role in the signalling to tell these inflammatory processes to go on. Okay, next slide.
Can I ask something?
Next slide, sorry, just... There you go, last question. Okay, thank you very much.
You have to wait for this one? Okay. So where is rice and broccoli in that file?
Yeah.
Is rice good or bad?
No, rice, right, okay, so if we want to develop a hierarchy of what is good and bad, you know, if I want to eat some staple in my food to go with my bolognese, for example, rather than having on pasta or spaghetti, yeah, go for rice. Rice doesn't contain anywhere near the levels of gluten, or what have you. In fact, it doesn't contain any gluten as far as I'm concerned, but unfortunately it does contain certain compounds that do try and block absorption of certain nutrients, because remember, these are plant seeds, so they're trying to protect themselves. But go ahead, eat rice, but don't make it a gigantic staple of your diet.
How about broccoli?
Broccoli's fine. Yeah.
So if I've been eating 70 to 80% fruit every day for the last 16 months, which I have.
Nice to meet you.
But you say you should eat a lot of fructose, it'll make you morbidly obese very quickly.
Well, what happens with your diet, because you're pretty much a raw food vegan, aren't you? Yeah. you mentioned to me before that you felt really great in the beginning, didn't you, when you went on that diet? Well, the reason most people feel really great in the beginning of their diets, it doesn't matter what diet they adopt when they're trying to lose weight, is that essentially you're on a high-fat diet, you're on a high-lard diet, because your body's metabolizing the fat reserves, because it needs them for key processes. All your hearts, by the way, you probably hear that saturated fat is bad for the heart. Well, it isn't. That's another piece of propaganda that's being put out there. Your hearts have a band of palmitic acid around it. It's the preferred energy storage molecule for your heart to burn. That's why if you look at any heart, a lamb heart or anything like that, it has a band of saturated fat around it.
I've heard
that's nonsensical.
I've heard that's supposed to be just a shock absorber, not necessarily a storage molecule.
Sorry, yeah, so go back to your question. So why aren't you fat? Right. Now, first of all, the fruits and stuff you're eating is wrapped up in fibre, okay? So it slows down the absorption. So it gives your body time to process, the liver time to process. But if you're gulping down Coca-Cola in large quantities and things like that, you get into trouble. If you ate lots of, you don't eat gluten, do you really? So obviously, and you don't eat much in the way of polyunsaturated fats. All three working together and lots of sugar, not wrapped up in fibre, but in tertiary refined carbohydrates, that will probably make you obese. Or lower your muscle mass. I certainly lower your muscle mass, that's one thing for sure. Because and the other thing is, well, when eating lots of sugar, one of the things meat has is an amino acid triplet sequence called carnitine, or carnosine, I forget which one. And that actually is an anti-glycating agent. Your body uses it to remove some of the cross-linking from the sugar. So, meat is important, really. It provides nutrients. Everyone knows about B12, but there are other things that meat provide for human beings. A thing I forgot to mention as well is that these grains and gluten and all that also inhibit absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K2 and K4, which is important if you want your children to have nice straight teeth, that sort of thing.
So we can ask about fish.
Yeah, fish is fine. Fish fine. Yeah, you see.
Is there any oil which is worth cooking with?
Yeah, butter, lard, beef dripping. I know, people react like that. They go, and it's like.
So you're better off cooking with butter as opposed to
coconut
olive
oil. Coconut oil's really good.
It's quite expensive though, isn't it?
Yeah, it depends where you get it from. A Holland Bar is about 12 quid, but I think they're doing get one free for 1p. There you go. I don't work for Holland Bar, by the way. And yeah, I mean, like olive oil, it oxidizes quite easily, and when it's oxidized, it basically is reacted, it's damaged when you're heating it up. So, and you probably notice when you're cooking with these things. I mean, ghee's fine as well, used in a lot of cooking.
You know as well, you're saying about antioxidants not proven to be good for you or whatever.
Well, they're just, right, so what happens is...
green tea, does that have properties?
I read a very interesting paper on that, actually. They got some female cyclists, healthy individuals, and they wanted to test out, this was funded by the EU, it was a paper, I think it was done in Poland or in Denmark, and it always sticks in my mind, this paper, and essentially they got a group of healthy women, and they wanted to see the effects of green tea antioxidants on markers, biochemical markers in these women. But in order to do that, they had to put them on a fruit and plant-free diet for a short period of time to see how, so that in order they could see the effects of the green tea, okay? What they noticed was that all positive markers for better health went up when they removed all the fruit and veg out of their diet. Now that's interesting, because so, and interestingly enough, at the bottom of the paper, I've never seen this in a scientific paper before, it says the EU, although funded by the EU does not support the findings of this study. And that's basically saying, we can't piss off our farmers and lobbyists. So that's interesting. But, look, if you enjoy eating plants, go for it, I'm not stopping you.
Does this mean that meat eaters are somehow healthier than vegetarians?
Right, okay. It's not a simple question of and and or, depending on your genetic profile. Look, actually there's a study also now coming out that vegetarians tend to have smaller brains, they shrink. I'm sorry, I'm just saying, things like that. So, look, you can do like harm reduction, let's use that term if you're a vegetarian, by losing the vegetable oils and the soya, ditch that, and eat some butter and cheese, for goodness sakes. Yeah, that kind of stuff. And cook with coconut oil and things like that. And that will minimise it. But all other things being equal, eating meat and not grains and things, but eating the diet that I was proposing there versus a vegetarian, yeah. Now, yeah, I would say all other things being equal, that person would be healthier.
How come we have it, our ideas are exactly backward?
Right, I'll tell you why. It's really simple. It's the scientific method being corrupted by the profit motive. There's lots of lobbyists, whether from agriculture, whether from big agricultural concerns. Cereals.
Lobbyists for meat as well.
Yes, but they're not as good at doing it as some of the other manufacturers. That's all. And so you got to remember, it's all about selling product. And if you think about it in evolutionary terms, what were the majority of your ancestors eating? And try and think of it in that terms.
My ancestors were probably eating olive oil, drinking olive oil.
Yeah, but they weren't just eating. That's all they were eating. And it's funny actually, when you look at American and British nutritionists, they talk about the Mediterranean diet. They talk about red wine and olive oil, and they call it. And the French, they eat a lot of saturated fat, but they have lower rates of heart disease, and they call it the French paradox. Now, a paradox means that your hypothesis is wrong, right? Many a beautiful hypothesis is being shattered by an ugly fact. And so basically, they're wrong, and a lot of people in the Mediterranean eat plenty of pork, eat plenty of meat, and things like that. They just don't wolf down, McDonald's and high fructose corn syrup and all those other things. Too much sugar probably causes more heart disease than saturated fat stuff. Yeah.
What do you think of the fact that no other species drinks another species' milk?
Trying to think if any do. Right, okay, right. Yeah, there's something in milk called casein, probably heard of it. That can invoke an immune response, but that's why goat's milk tends to be a lot less allergenic in certain people. But I would point out that people who have eaten gluten have lower stomach pH, so the stomach acid can't break down the protein, so the protein gets into the stomach, into the small intestine, you have a leaky gut, and that's what gets into the body, provokes an autoimmune response, and they say they have allergies. So do you see the mechanism I'm trying to describe there? Right, so if you're eating stuff like bread and what have you, or gluten, or soya, or any of these things, it's lowering your stomach pH so it can't break down proteins into amino acids, because it should just all be amino acids when it gets into the small intestine, and then it should get absorbed. But if you're eating gluten, it opens up your gut lining, large tracts of peptide sequences, which are amino acids put together, go into the bloodstream, and the immune system attacks that, causing an autoimmune response. And then that's why people have allergies.
What's that got to do with milk?
Milk contains casein, which is a protein, and cow's milk contains one I think is called A1 casein, and goat's milk contains A2 casein, I think, was the other way around. And the goat's milk one is more similar to the one you find in mother's milk.
How about kefir?
Kefir is better because you're fermenting, so you're breaking down some of those products, lactose in particular.
So milk's good?
Well, if you're Northern European, it should be alright for you.
Kefir is better. Just fermented.
Yeah, you can ferment milk. Kefir, what he's mentioning. Fermented milk. Lots of, yeah, Africans do it, stuff like that.
Is it alcoholic?
What do you think about, I've read an independent study that human body is unable to break down meat proteins.
Yeah, that's a load of hogwash. Sorry. You got a 23-foot long small intestine, right? It's perfectly adapted, as I was showing in the earlier pictures of physiology, that our guts shrank because we developed cooking and we became meat eaters. Meat is far more nutrient dense than plants. So our guts are actually set up to do that. In fact, if I was to get a sheep, a human, or say a pig, and a cat, and we measure the comparative gut lengths, the sheep has a longer gut, the pig is somewhere in between, and the cat has the shortest one. Practically cats, because they're obligate carnivores, they just have a stomach, gullet, a stomach, small intestine, no hindgut, and then just a bowel, and that's it. That's their GI tract. So we have a larger testing with for some plants, but no, there's a lot of propaganda out there because everyone has their own agenda, and it's basically trying to. That's why I showed the beginning bits about how humans evolved to try and provide you with a foundation of where to start. What do we know, and does it make sense from there? That's what I'm trying to show. Sorry, you had a question initially.
Yeah, I had a question earlier about. We were talking about celiac and its connection with this brain fog things.
Gluten, actually, you don't have to have celiac to have these problems with gluten.
Has anyone, I'm sure there's been some research find out the links between.
There is. I mean, if you go on to PubMed, which is medical papers, and just type in gluten and various, whatever you want, search terms, you'll find abstracts. But the problem is that because a lot of the research is funded by pharmaceuticals and what have you, unless you're pretty scientifically minded, because they don't control the variables sometimes, or they'll use statistical obfuscation to make it bias their way. So you have to be able to sift through that first in order to arrive. Otherwise you'll just end up saying one thing says this, but the other thing says that. And that's the problem. That's why a lot of people struggle when it comes to nutrition.
To get money out of science.
Yeah, because we live in a system where money, a lot of scientists, they get funded by, say you're a research chemist and you're working on certain things. You probably heard of resveratrol, stuff in red wine. Or they're now trying to say this stuff, if you take it, it will make you live till 1,000,000 years old and all that sort of stuff. That's a pile of rubbish as well. That's found in red wine, things like that, and grapes. This whole idea that plant antioxidants are somehow some miracle thing is nonsense. For instance, turmeric, you see a lot of stuff saying turmeric's great, it's anti-cancer and what have you. You could eat a kilo of turmeric and it won't get absorbed into your gut. But if you eat pepper, like Indians do cook curries and what have you, there's something called piperine, and that opens up your gut lining, and the turmeric can go in. But what happens to the turmeric when it gets in there? It just gets processed by your liver and detoxified, So, if the body wanted it, it'd hold on to it and do something with it. But instead, it just goes straight to the liver and gets broken down.
In your opinion, what could possibly be done to stop the corruption in the industry?
Well, stuff like this, just tell people what, to basically get rid of money. That goes back right to about what the Zeitgeist movement is about. As long as you have special interests, lobbyist groups, all this sort of thing, it's very hard to get the truth, And this is why I can understand why people are sometimes skeptical of scientists and what have you. And they should be. Because, just if I wore a white coat and said to you smoking's great, like they used to do in the 40s, people used to listen to that.
Radiation bill.
Yeah, exactly. So, unless you're somewhat scientifically trained, you can filter out through some of the BS that they feed you, essentially. Sorry, about? Yeah, again, they contain phytates and what have you. About omega-3 is contained in hemp and what have you, but it's a precursor form that, I think it's something like, I can't remember the top of my head, I think it's 43% of people can't really utilise it. Again, in terms of what's optimal and what's less optimal, I'd rather get my omega-3 from fish or from beef. You've got to remember as well, quite a lot of you came from maybe populations that didn't live anywhere near a coast. So you probably didn't eat, your ancestors probably didn't eat that much fish. So they got it from like hunting aurochs, the predecessors of cows. Picture the biggest bull you've ever seen, times it by 3 in size, make it 3 times as mean. That's what a lot of your ancestors had to prey upon, And so we were eating those guys a lot longer than we were eating, so some of the hemp seeds, for example. Sorry? What's lime? Oh, linseed. It's good for furniture polish or making your cricket bat stronger. But I wouldn't eat it. There's much. It doesn't even taste that nice. What's the matter with you? I'd rather eat butter. Sorry? Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yeah, it's omega-3. Yeah, but there's also omega-6 in it too. But, yeah, but all plant seeds contain omega-6.
What's the ratio?
I can't remember the ratio off the top of my head, but the point I'm trying to say is, because they behave competitively, the easiest way to get those ratios down rather than counting. Because it's the other thing about food. Does any animal out there, or actually, forget animals for a second, think about hunter-gatherer tribes, do they have words for omega-6 and protein and carbohydrate? No, they have words for meat, they have words for nuts, they have those words, and they just ate their natural diet without thinking about these things. They got what they could eat. So, you know, a diet that's actually our natural diet, you shouldn't have to worry about these things because all the nutrients are there in their natural place.
Is there a problem with mixing diets then?
Mixing diets?
Cultures,
Yeah.
choose what you want.
Yeah, if you look at a lot of immigrant groups, my brother married a girl from Leicester, which has got the highest Hindu population in Britain, and they're mainly Gujaratis. And I went there for this wedding, and they all eat a lot of grains and stuff like that. I didn't see one man over the age of 30 who didn't have a full head of hair. They all had nice pot bellies, quite low muscle mass. You know, because eating mainly a vegetarian diet, but like, you know, certain populations. There's a very good study called the Tokelau study, and the Tokelau is an island in Polynesia by New Zealand. They only had a population of about 1,000, and basically they used to just eat fish, breadfruit, I think pork, and coconut. That's all they used to eat. And then when New Zealand started administrating in that area, there used to be a ship going there every 6 months or so often. And they started eating bread, crackers, you know, all that stuff. And they started getting diabetes and things like that. Before, there was none of that. And then the New Zealand government said to these guys, oh, you can move to New Zealand if you want. And what? So this, for epidemiologists and doctors, well, this is an excellent opportunity for us to study what happens to the population when they go over.